Help! The year is ending! No! Keep the year going! We loved this past year. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. This is some more news. And today's episode, you'll notice, is a little shorter. We posted this several months ago on our patreon.com/somemore-news. Check it out. And we're posting it today for fun. It's a week of the year, and here's the episode. Something to note. There is a clip of Charlie Kirk in this episode. We clown on him a little bit. We talk about some things he said, and we filmed it before the thing happened. So just be aware of that, and hit play. I'm not, you already did, but play the episode. Whoa. What am I doing here? This doesn't feel like YouTube. This feels exclusive. Fancier somehow. Better upgrade my outfit to give this the respect it deserves. Okay, now we're ready to go. Same deal here as always, friends. The news, some more of it in fact. And here it is, a question actually. Who was the president of the United States in the year 2020?
Then you fast forward to the Biden administration, who they put this on steroids and actually allowed the public to take part in this game. Example, Summer of Love, where rioters were out there burning police stations, assaulting officers, taking over our cities.
The Biden administration, who put social justice on steroids and led to events that happened in the summer of 2020 before they were even in the White House. Damn you, Brandon! You've seen clips like this a lot over the last few months, I'm sure. Conservative politicians and pundits absolutely furious over things that Democrats, or specifically the Biden administration, did somehow during the first Donald Trump administration. Here's one we showed you some of on public YouTube a few months ago.
The Biden administration had exactly the same thing the Trump administration has on Epstein. Exactly. Right. Because Epstein was convicted during the Biden administration. Not one time did Hakeem Jeffrey call for any exposition of what the Biden Justice Department knew. Not once. So this guy's a top phony, okay? He's a political player. He doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't care about the people.
Hold on, Bill.
This is what he does.
Hold on. You said Epstein was convicted during the Biden administration. Epstein committed suicide during the Trump administration.
Yeah, so whether you
Bill, I think this is important. Bill, I think this is important. He was arrested in 2019, and he committed suicide in 2019. He died August 10th of 2019. So the Biden administration was not involved in a conviction or a trial of him. They were in of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Okay. And that's a good point of clarification. But he was arrested and indicted under Merrick Garland.
No, under Trump.
Who had all of the information.
Epstein was arrested, indicted, and committed suicide under Trump. In 2019, Trump was president. Merrick Garland was not the attorney general.
Okay.
That's what can happen when you do it live. So, okay, it would be easy enough to say that Bill O'Reilly and Representative Mike Collins are liars or dummies and call it a day. But maybe something else is going on here. Maybe there's a reason that conservatives are either legitimately getting confused or lying about what happened and when over the past less than a decade. And not in a silly cunk on earth type of way, or an equally silly but lesser known marvels of the science type of way. In a way that actually says something about them as people and what they want. ... Do we still do title card? Believe it or not, Donald Trump has been the president before. Okay, so let's start by going through some examples in the most oft-cited case of 2020 amnesia, the COVID pandemic. Republicans hated that. Like, I know it wasn't fun for anyone, but the freedom lovers in the Republican Party are absolutely fuming at the things they were forced to endure during that turbulent year.
We did not receive any apologies from the ruling class that lied to us repeatedly during COVID. the lockdowns, the efficacy of the vaccine, the mask mandates, school closures, and we just act as if it didn't happen. And I don't think the American ruling class understands the undermining of their credibility that happened when the entire country had their lives thwarted, especially young people. We're just supposed to reopen the country and be like, well, why don't you trust us anymore? Well, it's because, the Hunter Biden laptops, Russian disinformation, 50 intel operations signed this letter. And I'm making a good point here because there was no contrition
That's just one example.
And again, I could go one after the other.
That's Christmas ham with hair gel Charlie Kirk. And he does a clever thing here when he blames the ruling class instead of the Biden administration. Even though he's talking about things that mostly happened in 2020 when the ruling class was these freaks. He's at least clever enough not to point the finger at Joe Biden specifically, which separates him from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who accused Biden of doing communist COVID shutdowns, or Lauren Boebert, who said that Biden closed the schools, or Ron DeSantis, who accused Biden of shortchanging Florida's congressional representation based on data from the 2020 census, which was conducted, again, in 2020. A shortchanging, which, by the way, was probably more his fault than anyone else's, given that he refused to help the Census Bureau get an accurate count. But back to Charlie Kirk, he's mad that the ruling class, some other group of people, never expressed contrition over the following. Lockdowns, the efficacy of the vaccine, mask mandates, and school closures. I don't want to spend much time relitigating the pandemic, but I want to go through two of those real quick. Lockdowns. We never really had lockdowns the way, say, China did, but let's assume Charlie and everyone else who mentions lockdowns just means stay-at-home orders. Fine. And school closures. For this one, I genuinely think there is a good faith debate we could have as a country as to how much school closures impacted children's learning and mental health, the strain they put on parents, and if quickly upgrading the HVAC systems in schools so that kids could go back would have been better than extended closures. We could have that debate. But that's not what he wants, is it? The implication from Charlie Cartman is that the country should receive an apology from the ruling class for stay-at-home orders and school closures. And here's where we get to the time frame of this stuff. Because you already know what I'm gonna say. The stay-at-home orders and the school closures happened in 2020 when Donald Trump was the president. Stay-at-home orders were issued in almost every state in the first few months of the pandemic, and they had nearly all expired by the time Joe Biden took over. A few states extended regional orders in areas that were having particularly nasty winter surges. States where the governor was a Democrat kept them in place a little longer on average, but it's not like everyone didn't see the value of stay-at-home orders early on. If you look for examples of people who were actually arrested for violating them, you'll see just as many from red states as blue states. As for school closures, every single state had allowed their schools to at least partially reopen by March 2021. Thanks, Brandon! By then, the decision was largely made by districts, which would often close schools again when COVID levels in the area reached a high enough threshold. So by the time Trump left office in early 2021, nearly all of these decisions were being made at the local level. And look, it's easy to forget what that first few months of the pandemic were like before culture war stuff like masks and vaccines were brought into it. Or rather, before they made those things into culture war stuff. Because when it comes to staying at home or closing schools, let's not forget which side we were all on at first.
And again, I think we as Americans need to unify and get behind the guidelines that the administration are issuing so that we can defeat this virus once and for all. Young people should know better despite those things. It's incredibly narcissistic and outrageous to go to the beach and continue to party when the country is going through this sort of virus fight. And we at Turning Point USA are trying to practice what we preach. We're giving people the option to work from home. I find no such humor in trying to defy these guidelines. And for young people who think they're invincible, Just go read what's happening in France and Italy and Belgium, where some of the most intensive cases are actually people in their 20s and 30s.
Of course. That's wild to watch, isn't it? When was the last time you saw a notable conservative talking about the COVID-19 virus as the bad and serious thing it was and is? He's not just rewriting the country's history, but his own. He was on board. Of course, times change, freaks evolve, and so does the culture war. In 2020, it was totally normal for conservatives to go after entitled bros who were breaking the rules because they were still in young people suck mode, instead of all government rules are evil if we can pretend that they were established by Democrats mode. So instead of still recognizing what that virus does, people like 2025 Charlie rage at the states who kept schools closed a little longer and issued stay-at-home orders for a little longer, as if that's the source of our country's current problems. The Democrats, aka the ruling class, are the culprits. And not to belabor the point here, but those people were correct about COVID precautions. The states that did more of the stuff that Charlie Kirk is now angry about, like social distancing and mask mandates, had lower COVID-19 death rates than states that didn't. Even if you were mad about mask mandates, they're gone. You won. They never restricted your freedom anyway. Other things they're mad about are Joe Biden's vaccine mandates, one of which wasn't actually a vaccine mandate and simply required you to get the vaccine or regular COVID tests. Repeat, or regular COVID tests. Regardless, that was struck down by the Supreme Court, and he rescinded the other for federal workers after deeming it was no longer necessary. That's the tyranny that they're all mad about. Or rather, the tyranny that was still going on because also unstuck in time RFK Jr. thinks they were still in place until literally August 27th, 2025. Plus, I'm sure most of the federal employees who were tyrannically required to get a COVID shot have since been fired anyway. But again, this isn't about COVID. This is about conservatives trying to convince themselves that if something bad happened, it had to have been perpetuated by the left. Or similarly, if it happened under Joe Biden's watch, it can't have been good. Almost like a syndrome that causes people to somehow be it's like a syndrome where you're like mentally altered, like you're deranged, like a president maddening syndrome. For example, here's a 2023 tweet from Marjorie Taylor Greene where she says, quote, "Listen to this mother who lost 2 children to fentanyl poisoning tell the truth about both of her sons' murders because of the Biden administration's refusal to secure our border and stop the cartels from murdering Americans every day by Chinese fentanyl." And the woman's testimony is legitimately harrowing. Her sons, Caleb and Kyler Kiesling, took what they probably thought were just Percocet pills, but they contained enough fentanyl to cause overdoses resulting in their deaths. And it's a real shame that her grief is being weaponized and politicized by Marjorie Taylor Greene, particularly because, despite her tweet blaming the Biden administration, the Kiesling brothers died in July 2020 when Donald Trump was president. During this same hearing, Greene continues to go off on the Biden administration in what appears to be an example of that syndrome we just talked about that I wish I could come up with a name for, but I just, there's a catchy name there. There's a catchy name. We'll figure it out.
In 2020, there were 4.8 thousand pounds of fentanyl seized by CBP. But in 2021, fiscal year 2021, it increased to 11.2 thousand pounds of fentanyl was seized by the CBP. That is a direct result of Biden administration failure policies. Now, here we are in to date, fiscal year 2023, they have already seized 12.5 thousand pounds of fentanyl.
Got it! Bidenemia, that's what she's got. Okay, so she's angry that seizures of fentanyl went up under Biden. I think because she's assuming it indicates that more seizures means smugglers were attempting to bring in more fentanyl, I think. But we don't know that. We don't know that at all. All we know is that Biden took over and his border patrol started seizing way more fentanyl than had been discovered previously. Something that you would think Greene would be really into. Would she have preferred they let the drugs in? And this is what all the confusion over who was president in 2020 is really about. Anything that happens under a Democratic administration must have been bad, and anything that happened under Trump must necessarily be good. So if a bad thing happens, you know that a Democrat must have been president. We can call it Green's Law or Green's Syndrome. So when conservatives think back to 2020, and it was filled with stuff they don't like, an upending of their day-to-day lives, protests in the streets, taxpayer money being unconditionally given to everyone, they assume, at first, that it must have happened when the guy they don't like was in charge. When they see, let's say, a spike in the nation's murder rate, they assume Democrats caused it, because Democrats equal more crime according to Green's Law. They don't look at the chart and see that the giant spike happened in the year 2020 when they were the White House press secretary. And the wildest thing is that the left kind of didn't blame Trump for that anyway. Like, most of us accept that 2020 was a weird year with unpredictable swings in human behavior. But this Trump amnesia malady on the right is impacting their entire relationship with the past. This has been especially evident recently amid the administration's bumbling response to anything related to Jeffrey Epstein. Remember that clip we just showed of Bill O'Reilly getting embarrassed by the guy who would himself later be embarrassed by a guy who's really good at debating? I mean, come on, he was forged in the fire of these fascist maniacs. Anyway, that clip of O'Reilly is not the only time confusion whoopsie-doodle we've had recently when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. Check out what Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, that's too many first names, had to say in July.
And you would think common sense would play. That's why they asked for transparency. We want transparency. We want the judges to have transparency in this too. But remember, there was a plea deal that was struck in 2009, way before I was in office, way before Trump was even considering to be in office, way before Pam Bondi was in office, way before Kash Patel was director. 2009, there was a sweetheart plea deal that was made underneath the Obama administration with Epstein.
Right. That's not
and that sweetheart has not been exposed.
No, it was 2000.
Oh, it's not? Well, when was the case heard?
It was 2008. It was the U.S. attorney at the time was a guy named Alex Acosta. He was a Bush appointee. He went on to become President Trump's Secretary of Labor. It all took place in 2008.
Who was in office at the time?
2008, George W. Bush.
Who was in office at the time?
George W. Bush.
No, 2009 is when the case came out, and it was and Obama was in office at the time.
It's not true. But let me ask you a question.
Oh, that is the look of a guy who doesn't know what years are. That's really interesting, right? That multiple prominent conservatives have either made the assumption or in bad faith tried to argue that the Obama or Biden administrations were somehow behind an Epstein files cover-up. This interview continues, and Jake Tapper, whom you must never be tempted to hand it to, again reminds Sir Names-a-Lot that Alex Acosta, the U.S. attorney who gave Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart deal under George W. Bush, had to resign as Trump's Secretary of Labor in 2019 amid the Epstein scandal, which, believe it or not, the Trump administration has been mired in before. Because here's the thing, they're not just trying to convince themselves that what happened isn't what happened. They're trying to convince you. They know that you are as unhappy about some of this stuff as they are, and they're desperate for you not to believe that any of it could possibly be their fault. Silly party Senator Mark Wayne Thomas Bryan Jerry Frank McGillicuddy Mullen gives that look that's honestly not that far away from this look. A deer in the headlights, oh shit, who are those gallows outside for look that you give when you know you done fucked up. When your lies have maybe gotten you in a bit over your head, but they've got nowhere else to go but through. They will keep making a mockery of the recent past until you legitimately can't remember when the pandemic happened, who was president when, what year it is, and how many Dexter reboots there have been. As of filming this, 2, 3 if you count prequels. The 2020 confusion is just an entry point into retconning the entire past because it makes them look bad. The unfortunately named writer Steve Bannon wrote a whole book about this very thing called Ministry of Truth. In the book, he writes, quote, "When GOP voices tell voters not to believe their lying eyes, using a combination of shameless dishonesty, partisan coordination, and relentless repetition, the rhetorical strategy is predicated on the idea that they can safely get away with it." And it's worked so far, right? The entire country is now unstuck in time. 31% of Americans still believe that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, even though he told Bill Maher it wasn't. And Oklahoma high school students now must be taught in history class about discrepancies in that election. Alternate history bullshit is now part of the curriculum, and it's about like 4 years ago. The president is taking over Final Cut at the goddamn Smithsonian, removing crucial history because he thinks they're too focused on how bad slavery was. And as of filming this, very bad. Slavery was very bad. Here's some rando on Twitter who thinks that Biden's Department of Homeland Security wrote the Epstein files before Biden was president, but then didn't release them so they could coerce Trump to be forced to release them as part of amendments in corrupt legislation that I guess Democrats are passing right now. You know, all those bills that Democrats are passing? And look, I know that it's just some rando, but GOP politicians actually listen to randos. And with politicians absurdly rewriting a past which just happened, and absent a consistent and reliable media ecosystem to separate reality and fiction, this is what reality is becoming. A society full of randos spinning fables where the only objective is to reach a third act where the president they like isn't a pedophile rapist. So after the break, that's it? I've got a whole second and third act of this. At the end, we find out the president is a pedophile rapist. It's a really great payoff. I drop a mug that has the name of Epstein's lawyer on the bottom, and I realize that all the pictures I've got up on my corkboard have names that my star witness fed me like a trained seal. It's really not the same without the climax. Oh well. Guess I'll write an ending here on the fly. What's a good ending first? Oh, Donald Trump was dead the whole time. And we fade out while cheering. Yay! He was dead the whole time. He's dead the whole time. He's dead. 4, 3, 2, 1. End of the episode! Oh my gosh, what a journey we've gone on. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you feeling in the mood to do that. We got a patreon.com/some-more-news. I mentioned that at the beginning of the episode, and I'm mentioning it again because I always do. And we've got a podcast called Even More News. It's twice a week on this channel and twice a week at the podcast store if you want to listen to it instead of watch it and listen to it. We got this show as a podcast, which you can listen to or watch here, which you just did. And we got merch at a merch store. And here's some examples of that merch. And 3, 2, 1, year. That's not what they say.